Welcome, everyone, to San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibilities Gala. We'll start in just a few moments. Please post a little bit about yourself in the chat. Also, I want to inform you we are recording tonight's event. Welcome, everyone, to SFA Physicians for Social Responsibilities Gala. We will start in just a few moments. Please post a little bit about yourself in the chat. Welcome, everyone. Please post a little bit about yourself in the chat. We'll start in 1 minute.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibilities Annual Gala. I'm Marge Plum, Executive Director of San Francisco Bay PSR, and this isn't your typical gala. It's a gathering for action, leadership, and advocacy. We meet at a time when democracy itself is under threat, and with it, the foundations of health, climate, and global security. From attacks on science and public health to the rollback of environmental protections and the escalation of global conflicts, the stakes could not be higher. So we ask, how can health professionals and health advocates safeguard truth, equity, and justice? Tonight, our speakers, Dr. Tracey Woodruff and Norman Solomon, will help us reflect on the past 9 months and chart a path forward. We'll also celebrate our emerging health activist awardees, and there will be time for your voices, your questions, and your reflections. For those new to us, welcome. Since 1979, SF Bay PSR has combined grassroots activism with the credibility of health professionals to educate the public and influence policies that protect people and the planet. As we begin, I'd like to share just a few highlights of our work in 2025. At the state level, we've been out in front in Sacramento, pushing climate and health legislation, including the Polluters Pay Climate Superfund Act, which would finally make fossil fuel companies pay for the harm they've caused. At the federal level, we're working with National PSR and the PSR Chapter Network to mobilize health professionals nationwide to defend the EPA endangerment finding, the backbone of clean air and water protections. In our Bay Area communities, We partnered with Bayview Hunters Point community advocates to educate residents about the health harms of gas stoves and the benefits of clean electric alternatives. Together, we installed electric appliances at the Potrero Hill Neighborhood House, the NABE, helping to protect indoor air quality for their child care program, community events, mental health services, and food bank. We've secured grant funding that allows us to support environmental justice organizations in working together to design culturally relevant outreach materials on the health harms of air pollution and the benefits of electric homes. We are partnering with UCLA Fielding School of Public Health on 2 state-funded studies examining pollution from residential appliances, its impact on air quality and disadvantaged communities, and providing the science needed to raise public awareness and guide stronger, more equitable policies. We are also working with a powerful network of nonprofit and community energy providers, including some of tonight's generous sponsors, to advance a just transition to building electrification. That means centering health and equity for underserved communities every step of the way. We're also investing in the next generation, funding internships, youth-led projects, and leadership development through the Dr. Tom Hall Student and Young Health Professional Fund. And tonight, we're thrilled to premiere Toxic Tales, Richmond's Zeneca Site, a new animated series created by Richmond Shoreline Alliance, our fiscally sponsored project, making complex cleanup issues accessible to the community. Let's show the video.
Excuse me, what are you doing?
Hola, vecino. I'm testing the soil for toxic chemicals.
Toxic chemicals? Why would there be toxic chemicals in the soil?
Well, next to this marsh, there's an area that used to be a huge chemical manufacturing plant. It's called the Zeneca site, or the Campus Bay site.
Wait, is this related to Chevron? Because I've heard the refinery is polluting the air.
No. While Chevron has caused a lot of pollution, this site isn't directly related. In fact, there's at least 115 contaminated sites in Richmond.
More than 100 contaminated sites? How is that even possible?
Richmond was once the industrial center of the Bay Area. The Zeneca site used to be Stouffer Chemical, a plant that made sulfuric acid, fertilizers, and pesticides, and then dumped its hazardous waste out the back door.
Are you sure? I've lived here for years, and I've never heard anything about that.
I'm very sure. In 1998, the California Water Board named Stige Marsh, next to the site, a high priority on its list of the state's most polluted hotspots.
Wait, what? This is where I live. Do you mean to tell me that the place my family has been living for generations is really that polluted?
Lo siento, pero sí. All sorts of toxics have been found in and around this site for many years. What's even worse is the plan to build a new, huge housing complex here. That's why I'm working with the Richmond Shoreline Alliance to get the site completely cleaned up. Richmond needs homes, but not on a toxic waste dump.
They wouldn't just build a new housing development on a contaminated site, would they?
You'd be surprised.
I'm more than surprised. Who would allow this to happen?
Well, the need for housing in the Bay Area is huge, and it's leading governments to move projects through more quickly. During the pandemic in 2020, the former mayor and some Richmond City Council members approved a plan to build 4,000 housing units here.
If they approved the plan, it must mean that the site is safe for people to live on.
I wish that was true. If you want, I can tell you all about it. The site, its history, and why the current development plan is dangerous for everyone.
I want to hear the whole story. I've lived here for years, and I've never heard any of this.
Trust me, what I've told you is only the tip of the iceberg.
Thank you. After the gala, we will share the link so you can see the entire series. Yes, explosion of hands clapping. All of this happens because of our incredible interns, volunteers, and part-time staff. Giselle, Bailey, Julie, Daphne, Sabrina, Shivangi, and Emerson. It also happens because of our dedicated board of directors who lead this work with their hearts and minds. Tonight, with all of our sponsors, donors, and ticket buyers, we raised over $75,000. Thank you all. Special thanks to our champion level sponsors, Barb Ernie, Bob Gould and Patrice Sutton, Jan Kirsch, Tom and Johanna Newman, Nancy Newman, and Mark Wallstrom, and to our sustainer level sponsors, Mike and Jeannie Martin, and to our supporter level sponsors, Mary Williams and Peter Elias, and to Peninsula Clean Energy for their support and partnering with our work. As I close, let's remember, we are living in unprecedented times, and the need for action has never been greater. We call on every health professional and advocate here tonight. Join us, read our action alerts, and take action. And now it's my honor to hand the mic to our board president and fearless leader, Dr. Bob Gould.
March. 80 years ago, our atomic age commenced with the Trinity test in New Mexico, followed shortly by the nuclear obliteration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which caused the deaths of approximately 200,000 human beings by the end of 1945. Many of the Hibakusha who survived were among countless other global victims of radiation-induced cancers and other dread diseases from the widespread despoiling of our planet from the entire nuclear weapons enterprise. The global persistence of over 12,000 nuclear weapons, many on alert status, continues to gravely threaten our time on Earth. We at PSR remain centrally committed to the abolition of nuclear weapons as the only solution to this existential crisis. Last month, we co-organized many events commemorating these victims and protesting the accelerating nuclear weapons development at the Lawrence Livermore Lab, work that aims to make our arsenal even more lethal. Some of those present engaged in a die-in protest, and some also participated in nonviolent civil disobedience. We also protest these weapons for their immense squandering of our resources. Current plans to operate, sustain, and modernize current nuclear weapons and purchase new forces would cost an average of $95 billion a year over the next decade. You may remember that at our San Francisco Bay PSR Gala last year, we had the privilege of hearing the riveting testimony of Tina Cordova, a leader of the Tularosa Basin Consortium representing the downwinders of New Mexico and other communities exposed for decades to the harms of the nuclear era, yet were denied compensation and fundamental care for their health burdens. I'm pleased to report that despite tremendous opposition by House Speaker Johnson, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or RECA, was recently passed as part of the otherwise horrendous, quote unquote, big beautiful budget bill. This marks a major victory for Ms. Cordova and countless other activists, but the compensation and promised health care remains limited, and for many people, this win is outweighed by the budget legislation's slashing of Medicare, Medicaid, and other fundamental health care programs. There's an alternative path. In our country, the grassroots Back from the Brink campaign continues to grow in influence with its vital disarmament plank supported by the U.S. Conference of Mayors and many U.S. municipalities. Currently introduced congressional resolutions, House Resolution 317 and Senate Resolution 323, are a main focus of Back from the Brink's organizing efforts. At San Francisco Bay PSR, it's our priority to connect our nuclear work with our younger generation of activists and across issues. On October 15th, our nuclear weapons abolition intern, Sabrina Spodny, will be hosting a special film screening of Dark Circle, a film that covers what the movie Oppenheimer left out. This event will include discussion with San Francisco Bay PSR member and film director Judy Irving. While this online screening is a student organizing focus, everyone is invited, and I hope you can join us. Our nuclear work is inextricably linked to ending the wars that have continued to squander the lives of millions of people in this century, further destroying our precious ecosystem and providing the spark for nuclear conflagration. The war in Ukraine, a confrontation involving two nuclear superpowers possessing 87% of the world's nuclear weapons, has already resulted in more than 1 million Ukrainian and Russian casualties. In Gaza, more than 60,000 Palestinians have been killed since the horrific slaughter conducted by Hamas on October 7, 2023. The large majority of the casualties are women and children and include many targeted health and humanitarian aid workers, teachers, and journalists. According to the UN, famine is now afflicting more than 500,000 people in Gaza, with 1 million more on the brink of starvation, with all of this daily accumulating horror leading many international organizations and experts, most recently the International Association of Genocide Scholars, to denounce these ongoing war crimes and call for an immediate end to the war and restoration of critical food and humanitarian aid. The dangers of these wars and their potential nuclear flashpoints will certainly be a central focus of the 24th World Congress of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which I'll have the honor of attending in Nagasaki at the beginning of October. And I anticipate these issues will be at the heart of what my friend Norman Solomon will be addressing shortly. Tonight, we're honored to host Norman Solomon as our first keynote speaker. Norman is a journalist, media critic, author, and activist. He is the executive director of the Institute for Public Accuracy and national director of Roots Action. He wrote the nationally syndicated Media Beat weekly column from 1992 to 2009, and he is the author of 13 books, including most recently, War Made Invisible: How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine. And now it's my great honor to hand the mic to Norman Solomon.
For decades, PSR has really broken through. And PSR has done that with a expansive vision of what public health means. We know that often academia and media and politicians, they put categories into boxes and they try to keep them there. But PSR has worked with a very different vision. And I can remember in the early 1980s seeing the film The Last Epidemic. And during that decade, it was that film produced by PSR, a 36-minute film that helped to change history. And I don't say that lightly. The work that people do, the spreadsheets, the phone calls, now the emails, the organizing, the meeting, all that doesn't make it into the history books. PSR maybe didn't make it into the history books when the INF Treaty was enacted in 1987. PSR maybe didn't make it into the history books when there's mention of the 1 million people who gathered at Central Park in New York City in 1982. But PSR was central to making that happen. Now I believe the evidence is there, the rational foresight is there to believe that PSR can change history again for the much better. No pressure. But PSR is very well positioned to transform, to a large extent, the media and political environment in this country. Not in one fell swoop, not suddenly, not in one dramatic action, but in the day-to-day work that health professionals can provide, the credibility, the veracity, the stature that healthcare professionals have in our society. No matter what attacks are taking place from corporate authorities, from the current regime in Washington, that's the crucial potential, I believe. We need, I think, a much broader concept in the public discourse of what public health really is. The twin dangers of nuclear weapons and the climate emergency that is upon us really involves a lack of education, agitation, organizing, and political leverage. nuclear winter, according to the best scientific research, would be a result of a nuclear war. And it's a tremendous challenge that even though there has been a lot of great work done building a climate movement, that the reality of what would take place from nuclear war in terms of a nuclear winter really gets short shrift in public consciousness, in mass media, and certainly in political discourse and the lack of action. The fact is that if a nuclear war were to take place, this planet would be engulfed in essentially a nuclear winter that would wipe out agriculture. And minimally speaking, the vast majority of humanity would not survive the year. Some estimates say 99% of the planet, human beings on this planet, would perish. This all has a context. Obviously, it's not just the discrete problem of the fossil fuel industry, not just the discrete problem of the nuclear arms industries, although, of course, those are huge obstacles to the kind of progress that we need. But this context, of course, is built into the political economy, into the militarism, and what Dr. Martin Luther King called the madness of militarism, and the consequences we see all around us every day, whether we are able to view it in the mass media, read it in the mass media, or not. What Dr. King called the demonic, destructive suction tube of massive military spending, while healthcare, education, housing, elderly care, and so much more goes unaddressed. That's where we are now, of course, even more. There's nothing to be nostalgic about in terms of 2 years ago or 10 years ago, but we all know that the situation is now much worse. The assaults on any decent guidance from CDC to medical professionals, HHS, the assaults on Medicare and Medicaid. This is a war, a domestic war on public health. But it's also an international war on public health, and it stems not entirely, but largely what the not so radical Dwight Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. This war on public health continues now with a $1 trillion a year Pentagon budget being put forward by the White House. One of the key components, and I think it's been very difficult sometimes to address politically or in media, is the belligerence from the US military, from US policymakers, from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, towards Russia and towards China. It's said that nuclear war won't show who's right. It will just show that everybody is gone. And we know that intellectually, we know that emotionally, and yet there are constant forces encouraging us to accept, perhaps participate in, but certainly not challenge the militarism, the belligerence towards Russia, towards China. We don't hold a brief for those governments. What we do say is that humanity is held together by one common humanity, one common thread. And when that thread is blown up, we all will suffer the horrendous results. Of course, we condemn what Russia is doing in Ukraine. At the same time, let us understand that there's a lack of consistency from US foreign policy. We've heard leaders from the Biden and Trump administration insist that never must there be one country willing and able to invade another country. We've constantly heard from political leaders of both parties that there needs to be what Antony Blinken called a rules-based order, which turns out to mean we make the rules and we break the rules. It turns out to mean that we, as the largest power militarily on the planet, we get to enforce our will as much as we can, because the precept, not the rhetoric, but the precept is might makes right. And so, for instance, when we hear that China is a threat because it is dominating the South China Sea, it is rarely, if ever, mentioned in the mass media what the middle name of the South China Sea is. there's an effort more and more from the US mass media and political leaders of both parties to, in effect, say that the Monroe Doctrine isn't good enough, just one hemisphere. Now it must be inflicted, it must be enforced as much as possible in both hemispheres, that the US should have the prerogative to work its will the best it can, the most it can, in terms of what it feels, or those in power policy feel is most efficacious for their goals. Well, what are their goals? Their goals include tremendous profits from arms manufacturing and sales and shipping overseas, the geopolitical positioning around the planet, favorable trade agreements, plundering of natural resources around the world, and on and on. Rarely do we hear about this kind of thing from mass media, so we need to hear about it. People around the world, and certainly in this country especially, need to hear about it from organizers, from activists, from people who have a long-term vision that's being enforced, or at least made possible by day-to-day activities. And I do want to emphasize really the importance of activism. As I said, it doesn't often get in the history books, but it's really the motor that has driven everything that we can be proud of in this country. The advances of unemployment insurance, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, women's rights, gay rights, environmental protection, on and on. It's never been handed down from above. It's never been sanctified or even encouraged by mass media. It's because people did the hard work of organizing. They did it at the grassroots. They networked statewide and nationally and beyond. And I think that is more than ever our challenge and our opportunity right now, as we're seeing broadly defined public health is undergoing the kind of assault that in its scope, in its pervasive viciousness, in our lifetimes from the United States, I think we've never really seen before. Health professionals certainly have a unique role to play. It's a role that really can't be filled from elsewhere in the society, to be organizing not only with the eyes downstream, but to go upstream, to widen, redefine and widen what it means to be a healthcare professional, not only to help to alleviate the suffering, to heal as much as possible those downstream, but also to address the causes of so much preventable suffering upstream. And of course, this is sometimes difficult, historically always difficult for people to go against the prevailing flow, to go against the sometimes avalanche and the waterfall of powerful interests, of propaganda, of messaging that really might involve some personal risks at some time. There's a saying among blues musicians that you might feel that you're getting lost, but you won't if you know the blues. And I think for activists, for organizers, for people who want to join their values with their actions, we might feel that we're getting lost with the cross currents and the sometimes hurricanes of political propaganda and social dissension and so forth. But if we have a single standard of human rights, we won't get lost. And that, I think, has to include opposing what Dr. King called the madness of militarism. This is a kind of insanity that has been normalized in our own society. It's reflected in the spending from the federal government. We've heard the saying that a budget is a moral document. In this case, it's a deeply and horrifically immoral document, and it has gotten more and more immoral with more and more horrific results all the time. That is a consequence of a $1 trillion budget. That's a consequence of a inculcated mentality that keeps many people, if not cheering the warfare state, at least remaining silent about it. And as we know from ACT UP in the 1980s, silence equals death. We have an opportunity to not engage in silence, but to do the opposite. Right now, the United States is funding Israel with billions and billions of dollars in terms of weapons shipments. And last winter, Amnesty International and Human Rights both issued categorical reports concluding that Israel is engaged in genocide. More recently, two Israeli human rights organizations, B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel, also issued reports concluding as well unequivocally that Israel is engaged in genocide in Gaza. This genocide would be impossible without US military shipments. We are paying for those shipments. 70% of Israel's weapons imports are coming from the United States. It's, I think, imperative if we're going to have a single standard of human rights that we name what is happening for what it is. And as part of the consistency of support for human rights, we call it out and we oppose it in every way that we can. Of course, no individual or no organization, no matter how large, can do everything or even address more than a little bit of what needs to be done. But everyone can do something. And more, it's imperative that we live in the present moment and we move forward with full awareness of what's at stake.
Thank you, Norman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for your comments that are very thought-provoking. I had a few questions in the chat that I'd like to relay to you and would welcome other comments and questions from others as well. The first question I'd want to take on is from one of our board members, Tom Newman. And I think it connects very much with, what are the chances for having returning to the sort of the spirit of having the treaties to reduce nuclear dangers as well. Tom's question is, do you support the same, more or less US weapons to Ukraine?
Or sending the weapons now to Ukraine? Well, I think without diplomacy, it's equivalent to saying, let's you and them fight. It's hard for me to see how the United States is occupying a high moral ground after several years of not only failing to support genuine diplomacy, but actually impeding genuine diplomacy. So with genuine diplomacy, yes, I think defensive weapons to Israel, to Ukraine could make sense. But in the absence of any willingness to support or engage in diplomacy, I don't support continuing to arm Ukraine so that Ukrainians and Russians can keep killing each other. I just don't understand how that's a high moral ground. There's no end to this war in sight otherwise.
I guess before I turn into another question in the chat, I'd just be interested in you reflecting on that whole situation in Ukraine, on what impact it has for returning to the table on many of the treaties that have gone by the wayside, like restoring New START treaty, thinking back of what you were saying about the 1980s and the progress that we made at that time.
Yeah, it's been a horrible setback, and 4 years ago we weren't in great shape anyway. I mean, President Biden had an opportunity to reestablish, or at least try to reestablish, the Open Skies Treaty, the INF Treaty, banning intermediate range nuclear weapons. The efforts that could have been made were not made. For that matter, resuscitating the triumph from President Obama of the Iran nuclear deal that Trump killed, and Biden refused to do that. I think refused to resuscitate it. I think all that has been made worse by the Ukraine war. And one thing I would add quickly is that the dangers posed by ICBMs, which uniquely, as that part of the triad, are on hair trigger alert, those dangers are greatly exacerbated by the escalation of US-Russia tensions. And so you rarely, if ever, see that discussion in the mass media. So I just would sum up that say, I would sum up to say that when the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists shows how close the doomsday clock is to midnight, they're not exaggerating. And so, all you have to do is go back to John F. Kennedy's speech at American University, where he really laid out what is at stake with nuclear war. And when you measure every major political leader in Congress, let alone presidents, in the last several years, they just don't measure up to some modicum of sanity about reducing the threat of nuclear war.
Norman, I'll close out with one other question that came up in the chat. I see there's another as well, but what was the Jeff Ritterman of our board has posed the question, what was the greatest influence on you to become a voice for change?
Well, I was born in 1951, and I lived in Maryland, which was segregated, and I went on a picket line at a segregated apartment in 1966, and I learned a little bit about activism then. But I would say most of all, the Vietnam War. And unfortunately, it's a paradigm that I think we've seen continually since then, that our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, our schoolmates, many people who we respect, we see that they're kind often in their personal lives and often compassionate to others. I learned during the Vietnam War, as I saw again and again with the US society supporting one invasion after another, up to the present day, the slaughter in Gaza, I saw how good people can go along with horrific policies and just be quiet. And so that paradigm that I began to see during the Vietnam War has really stayed with me.
Thank you. We have time for other questions as well. I just read the clock wrong. One of our board members, Bonnie Hamilton, has a question. I shudder to even mention this. Please reflect on the trajectory of our country going towards another civil war. If there could be the potential for the use of nuclear weapons, and what can we do to shift this trajectory?
Well, as the saying goes, my crystal ball is in the shop, but the effort to first limit the power of the Trump regime is so crucial. We can see a through line from healthcare, education, housing, to the militarism, to the gunboat diplomacy, and all the rest of it. And so the electoral path, I think, is going to be crucial to mitigate this dystopian future that we're living in to some extent and could get a lot worse. And the electoral process will be crucial, but at the same time, it's a conceit of many politicians and candidates that social movements are or should be a subset to their election campaigns. And that's backwards. The election campaigns, the electoral work, crucial as it is, should be, and really are in the light of history, subsets of social movements. And when we look at the last many decades in this country, all that has been achieved ultimately through electing or pressuring or lobbying certain people to do finally the right thing, all that has been the result of social movements really getting themselves together and making it happen.
Thank you. Robin Cooper has a question. You started with the risk of nuclear winter and nuclear war, and then ended with Gaza. Do you see risk of nuclear escalation in the Middle East now?
I think it's a very understated risk. Very rarely will somebody in Congress or anybody in mass media mention that Israel has a lot of nuclear weapons. And it simply is, as a matter of fact, the US government has a policy of officially never acknowledging what everybody who's informed knows, that Israel does have nuclear weapons. And there are efforts to nuclearize in Saudi Arabia. There are indications that the Saudi government would like to acquire nuclear weapons. So it's a radioactive tinderbox, so to speak, and the anti-Iran hysteria has really increased the risks of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. And there's no doubt that the Israeli government is fixing for even a bigger fight with Iran, which can only make things worse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking as well, and a concern at IPPNW in terms of some of the other aspects of the various deals going down is to promote the nuclear power throughout the Middle East and other places, which could provide the basis for increasing the quote unquote horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons as well. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, very much. And I agree with you, Bob. And if you look at the cheerleading of the so-called Abraham Accords, where normalization of relations with Israel from certain Arab states is being cheered on. Well, I mean, Israel is a apartheid state, and it's a genocidal state, thanks to the U.S. government support. And so, cheering on alliances with Israel, a good thing? I don't think so. There's an irony about the name of the Abraham Accords. If I remember my Old Testament correctly, there was Abraham, there was Isaac. People may know the song by Leonard Cohen, Song of Isaac. And part of the parable is that if God tells you to kill your son, you should do it. And if we all are brothers and sisters, ultimately, then why is the killing in the Middle East, which can only spread the more killing happens, why is that de facto U.S. Policy to support it through supporting the Israeli government? And I say this as an American Jew. I've been to Israel. I know the history pretty well, and we just need a single standard of human rights. It's not that complicated, ultimately.
Thank you, Norman. We're going to have to move on, but I just want to thank you, as always, for your clarity and vision and all the work that you're trying to do to bring the various movements, the environmental, climate, peace, anti-militarism work together, because it's always been a real challenge, particularly across generations. And just thank you so much for being here tonight.
Well, I really just want to express my appreciation for all that the Bay PSR continues to do. It's really inspiring for our region and our country.
Okay, thank you, Norman. I'm now going to turn the mic over to Patrice Sutton, our environmental health chair, and take it away, Patrice.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you so much, Norman. It's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, whose work is so closely aligned with the work of our chapter. Our Environmental Health Committee members represent many and varied disciplines, including pediatrics, dermatology, cardiology, oncology, ophthalmology, neurology, psychiatry, and we even have a pathologist. Together, we have virtually every organ system covered. And just as all our organ systems need to work together to ensure our health, we gather all this expertise together to collectively help guarantee that the ecosystem that sustains all life will be preserved now and for future generations. Our primary tool is shaping public policy that determines the quality of our air, water, and food, and how these precious resources are distributed. Our focus is on our most vulnerable populations, many of whom now live in environments threatened by the dismantling of environmental protections, the ravages of our climate crisis, and living in environments of sustained fear and repression. So our work cannot succeed in a vacuum. A functioning democracy and alliances with other diverse groups who seek to protect the health of the most vulnerable and future generations are essential to our efforts. Which brings me to the work of our next speaker. Tracey Woodruff is director of the University of California, San Francisco Program on Reproductive Health and the Environment, or PRE. Through scientific research and relentless policy advocacy, including training scores of advocates through its Reach the Decision Makers program, PRE works to free us from exposure to toxic chemicals and create the systems that are needed to prevent these exposures. PRE connects the best science to policies to protect our health and the future. Tracey is also a leader of the newly established UCSF Center to End Corporate Harm, which has a vision of a just, healthy, and democratic society where public health policies are built on unbiased science that prioritizes health for all, free of industry influence. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Tracey and hand the mic over to you.
Well, thank you. That was really very kind. And thank you for all the work that you've done to really make all the things I'm going to talk about happen, Patrice and Bob, and well, everyone on this call. Well, actually, I don't know everyone on this call, but I know you will be doing that work in the future. So I'm going to talk about the Trump administration attack on sciences and health. And I wanted to follow up on the comment that said that this is unprecedented. That may be true, but it is not unplanned. And I will talk a little bit about that in my remarks. So I'm going to cover really how the polluters now are really controlling the rules by which we are the public is the unfortunate victims, and the role that corporations are playing and have actually been planning for this moment for, well, probably about 30 years. And what is the kind of consequence that's going on, and really what are we doing to fight back on these corporate polluters? So the reality is that as everyone knows, we're in Trump 2.0, and it's hyper accelerated, right? So all the things that happened in the first Trump administration have come back with a vengeance in the second Trump administration, and some of the same people that we saw from the chemical industry. So the American Chemistry Council, Nancy Beck, I can tell a little story about her at the end if you want. And then Lynn-Ann Dekleva from Dow and also from the American Chemistry Council are now back in charge of the offices that control the rules around pesticides and toxic chemicals. And those are just some of the people that we know. There are also people in charge of the Superfund office, the Air office, and different parts of leadership at EPA with much more severe consequences, because in the first Trump administration, there was a plan, a pretty specific plan about what to do at EPA. It was the 10-point plan from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, but it's been supercharged with Project 2025. And despite Trump saying that he eschewed him, Project 2025 is their blueprint for how they are going to be acting in the government. So if anyone is familiar with this document, as we are, you can see that they are just basically walking through the instruction manual that they have already been putting together and actually been working on even before the first Trump administration, during the time they were out of office, and we're now seeing the dismantling pretty aggressively in this administration. So one of the big things that probably people are very familiar with is the attacks on research funding as well as science integrity. Some of it has been around the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can talk more about this at the end because I don't have a lot of time, but some grants have been canceled. Some have been restored. There's a lot going on in the legal realm about which grants can come in and come out. But I will just say from our own experience that we have had grants canceled, for example, or had to rescind components of grants because they were deemed to be focusing on, for example, Black pregnant women, and that was not deemed to be appropriate or in line with the Trump administration's priorities. There's also, as people know, that they defunded several universities, and the most recent university is UCLA with $500 million in research funding and other types of federal funding that have been pulled from UCLA. So it's it's pretty serious, with also attacks on science integrity. And to focus on EPA, I mean, Lee Zeldin came in very quickly at EPA with a very specific agenda, which he is exact. I mean, you can go, and I often do go look at his press releases. Don't look at the one Legends of Zeldin. That's really more of a joke in my mind. But anyway, but they are very specifically saying that they are going to be the most deregulatory agency and deregulatory EPA in EPA's history. And that is actually quite true. They've been quite busy eliminating many of the very important rules that have been put in place to protect people's health. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but I do want to say that part of a lot of their plan, again, comes from not only the recommendations in Project 2025, but also come in from for example, the Manufacturers Association, along with many of the corporate interests who do not like that EPA is stopping them from polluting people and hurting their profitability. Sent a letter to the Trump administration about all the different rules that they wanted to see changed at EPA, and those have been pretty much their playbook for removing. So we put together some of the ways that the Trump administration is basically making America more toxic again. This is only a fraction of the list of items that the Trump administration has been busy putting in place. We have a blog on this, which I have at the bottom. A lot of this, again, comes from the industry's wish list, which we see realized in the administration. But I think some of the ones that maybe people, I mean, some of them are structural issues. So the administration has announced that they are going to eliminate the Office of Research and Development, which I'll talk a little bit more in about a minute. And then they have also been laying off many of the staff. So they also have eliminated the environmental justice programs and staff. They eliminated a lot of the funding that actually billions of dollars of funding that was allocated to address climate change. They've recently announced their new rulemaking to remove the endangerment finding. This is decade. I think this is from the second Bush administration where EPA identified greenhouse gas emissions as an endangerment under the Clean Air Act, which allowed them to make many regulations around the power plant rule, which they've also removed. But they've also been working busily with Congress to rescind components of the Clean Air Act, rescind it. So under the Congressional Review Act, which people probably aren't familiar with, it allows Congress to take a rule that an administration put in place and basically remove it. Say, no, we aren't going to let you do that. But it also has the added effect that it also removes that component of whatever statute they take it out of. And EPA cannot go back, say a new administration comes place. The way the Congressional Review Act is written, EPA cannot go back and just reissue the same rule. They can basically not ever do that rule unless there is significant changes. So essentially, Congress has said you will not use maximum achievable technology, which is basically whatever you can buy on the shelf, you companies, to stop these known toxic pollutants from coming from your facilities. This is a really huge deal because it's a pretty standard component of the Clean Air Act. Some of the other things that they have been doing is they withdrew a regulation to limit PFAS discharges in water. They're also actually re-looking at parts of the drinking water standard for PFAS. They've also been undermining a lot of the assessments about how they use science in their risk assessments, particularly with 1,3-butadiene, which was the first one out of the new administration, and recently with phthalates, which is not on here, and delaying a lot of rules that were put in place by the Biden administration to protect people from different types of toxic chemicals, including like trichloroethylene. So now I'm going to talk about Office of Research and Development. I think this has been the most dramatic, is it? I don't know. They're also getting rid of the clean. It's hard to decide which is the most dramatic, but this is definitely an area which will not only undermine EPA's ability to do science, but will have permanent and long-term repercussions on EPA and the Office of Research and Development's ability to provide the kind of key science that is used to make not only EPA decisions about regulating, but is also used in many different types of disaster and terror attacks. I think people don't really know what the Office of Research and Development does, and that's understandable. The government does a lot of things in the background that we don't know about until we need them. So, for example, they have been involved in many terrorist attacks. They did the anthrax, I don't know if people remember the anthrax attacks on Congress that happened back, I think, in the Trump or the Clinton administration. ORD was the one that figured out how to clean up the anthrax that was released in the Capitol. ORD went and the scientists there dealt with East Palestine cleanup. They dealt with the the Horizon oil spill that happened in the Gulf of Mexico. They assist in hurricane recoveries. Should there be a terrorist attack in the United States, including a nuclear terrorist attack, ORD is in charge of providing the critical scientific expertise to do the cleanup. And EPA is dismantling that. So it leaves the United States and the people who live there in an extremely vulnerable position. They also work on drinking water and safety standards. They do a lot of work to identify contaminants that are just simply not supported by research universities. So, for example, ORD scientists discovered that a company was releasing a certain type of PFAS contamination into the water source in North Carolina. And it was because this scientist figured that out, they were able to work with the state and identify it and then stop it from happening. They also do all the health impacts assessments of many different toxic chemicals, which not only states rely on, but other international agencies, which include formaldehyde and TCE. And this is of great annoyance to the chemical industry because they just don't want people to know that their products they're making are toxic and killing people. And so this is what the industry's wish list has been, to eliminate the Office of Research Development and IRIS, and they have essentially somewhat they've announced doing this, but I will say what's been happening since then. But it just wanted to remind everyone that these chemicals and pollution, people are exposed to these chemicals every day. They are making people sick. There is some component that is resonant with the public. If people have been following the Make America Healthy Again discussion, a lot of families are really concerned about the chronic health conditions that are going up in the population, including in their children, and, for example, have been very activated, including around some of the pesticides that EPA is supposed to regulate, like glyphosate or atrazine. And the public is more savvy to the concerns about toxic chemicals, and they don't like that polluters have a role in government decision making. So just to give a brief, this is like super brief, but we really work on identifying these toxic chemical exposures and how they occur, who the most susceptible populations that are being exposed, including during pregnancy, childhood, communities, environmental justice communities that have higher burdens of disease, and really talking about what this science means for for citizens, but also to policymakers. And just one of the things that we have, as I think was said, that we've started the Center to End Corporate Harm because the root cause of these toxic chemicals or fossil fuels that produce climate change, or many of the chronic diseases in the population, come from corporate produced health harming factors. And we have faculty across the UCSF campus who work on different aspects of these health harming industries, whether it's fossil fuels, tobacco, toxic chemicals, ultra processed foods, alcohol. I didn't include opioids. We have faculty members working on opioids, and together we are working to collaborate to identify the mechanisms by which corporations produce their health harming products and develop strategies to counteract that. And we know that this is really a health crisis because of the growth in many of these chronic disease burdens, some of them like Parkinson's, which have very little genetic component to them. So we work on sunshining corporate industry tactics. So we both conduct empirical research on corporations using the Industry Documents Library, which I'll talk about in a minute. We look at how they influence both the scientific process, the policy process, and the communications process to sunshine their tactics and then develop strategies to counteract those. And I want to just talk about this amazing resource that started with the tobacco industry. So people know that Stan Glantz helped start this industry documents library many years ago, but has grown to cover many different industries. The documents just redid their website to make it's obviously more beautiful, but easier to use, and covers tobacco, opioids, the chemical industry, drugs, food, fossil fuel, and you can look at the different ways that the industry. I mean, the thing about doing this, having these industry documents, is we don't have to say, oh, we think the industry did that. You can actually see what the industry did by looking at what they say in their own words to obfuscate the health harms of their products and the strategies they use to undermine the science and policy process. So what's our remedy? Because this is, as is mentioned, a very dire situation, and we need to be thinking about what are we doing to counteract these very, very dangerous times. And so I want to say that one thing that I think is really important to remember is that by speaking out, it actually can have a huge difference. I think that people don't realize, most people don't go to Washington, D.C. It's understandable. It's really far away. It seems kind of obtuse. But the chemical industry is there all the time, visiting these different offices. They put a lot of money into supporting these various candidates for office, and then they spend a lot of time visiting them afterwards. And so it turns out, though, because it's not, people don't necessarily do this, but if we go and speak to our congressional representatives, even because we don't come from a financial stake and we're there to talk about the public's health and about supporting the public, that speaking out actually can have an oversized influence on congressional change. So people who have been let go or who are previous ORD people have been to Congress to talk to them about why ORD matters so much. And a lot of people in Congress, like probably most people on this call, have no idea what the Office of Research and Development at EPA does. Even I, who used to work at EPA, had no idea all the things it did until I was on their board of scientific counselors. And when you hear really all the ways that ORD touches everybody's lives, including being very involved in the cleanup of waste sites that every congressional representative has, their citizens are probably touched by, it makes a big difference. And so there's been a lot of activity either organized by other NGOs like Earth Justice. We were there when was this? I guess I was there in August. We were there in August to speak to different representatives about the Office of Research and Development. And this is what happened, is that the Senate, in overwhelming bipartisan vote, 26-2, which is very unusual these days, from the Appropriators Committee, they said they were both appalled about EPA's plans to eliminate its research office and voted to both approve fiscal spending, basically maintain the staffing levels at the Office of Research and Development, and to hire, retain, and rehire people who had been separated. Now, did they give them a big boost in money, which they deserve? No, but I think this is a really important milestone that Congress is starting to push back on some of the administration's really egregious activities. And we've seen this also with NIH funding. And the Senate put out their version of appropriations for NIH, which had a small increase for NIH. The House put out their version for their NIH bill, which was at flat funding. Flat funding is still a little bit of a cut, but it's way better than what the Trump administration wanted to do, which is to gut and reorganize NIH and basically remove many of the agencies we care about, including National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences. The Senate NIH budget bill said not only would you give a little bit more money, but they also said you cannot rearrange NIH as you have announced that you want to do. And
Tracey?
lastly, yes,
Yeah.
am I done? I am done. I'm almost done.
There you go. Well, I was going to ask you about MAHA. Looks like it's coming
Oh,
up.
look, I got to talk about MAHA. Is that way? Let me just try this one more time. Yes, I'll talk about MAHA. Yes, the Make America Healthy thing is like we could talk more about this, but we have been following the MAHA, what do I call this anyway, situation. And there's been 2 MAHA reports. Make America Healthy Again is part of the kind of ecosystem that RFK used to help provide support to Trump during the election. And Trump's, I mean, I don't know how true this is, but Trump's reward to him is to make him the head of HHS, where one of the first things they did was actually put out a report about on the increase in chronic diseases in children. It came out in May, and there was a lot of things in there to like. We didn't really have this cover this here, and you can read about it. We have made a statement about it. They said chronic diseases growing up in children. True. They said chemical exposures and multi-chemical exposures is an important component of that. We agree with that. They also named ultra-processed food, technology, and over-medicalization. They weren't really too heavy on the vaccines, which was good. But they also had us in every section in each of those 4 areas, they talked about how corporate capture is a key component of why the government has not acted enough to protect the public's health. And they specifically named the revolving door, like at EPA, that a lot of EPA officials go from EPA to work for corporations and then back again. And they talked about the extensive amount of lobbying that these chemical corporations, and they actually linked to how much money the American Chemistry Council spends to lobby EPA. This was really unusual in a government report. Nonetheless, and as we now see from the new report that came out, the chemical industry, particularly the pesticide industry, was apoplectic about this report. They also said that glyphosate was toxic, as well as atrazine. These are 2 pesticides, which the MAHA movement has been very dedicated to having the government deal with. The new report was really a gift to the pesticide industry and actually took a lot of language from CropLife America, which is the organization that represents the pesticide industry, to basically say that pesticides are awesome, and our job is really to convince people about how awesome they are and that EPA has an awesome approach to evaluating their health risks. So a real 180. So I think it remains to be seen, because the MAHA report, the new second MAHA report just came out this week. It remains to be seen how the MAHA movement will respond to essentially abandoning the quote promises that were in the first report. And then lastly, I just want to say that I talked about Project 2025 and then the previous version of that for EPA, which was the Competitive Enterprise Institute 10-point plan. And it really comes from a long history of them developing and focusing on changing the rules of government to favor corporations over the public's health. So we have also been developing, well, what would a unbiased science-based decision-making process look like in the government, and what is the exact mechanisms by which the rules should be set up so that the government makes decisions that are about considering people and the public's health and not corporate interests. And so we put out recommendations in the first Trump administration. We've updated them for the second administration. We have white papers on each of the topic areas, including science integrity, corporate interference, best available science, and particularly how to use the science, and environmental justice. And like, obviously, nobody in this administration is going to take our recommendations, but there is things happening in Congress around this. And so we've able to raise some of the issues that we think are important, particularly around financial conflict of interest. This intersects interestingly with the MAHA movement, because if you look at the second MAHA report, there is recommendations in there about not financial, but conflicts of interest for NIH related activities that we actually agree with, but we would like to see applied to EPA. Now, I think that's because corporations haven't dug into it enough. That's my opinion. So so we have a big challenge. Environmental chemical exposures were already not well dealt with in the previous administrations, and now it's going to be acceleratedly worse. And the administration is actively taking actions that will make people sicker. But we do think that it is really important that we can actually make a difference. And I think our analysis of what's going on is a lot of people are frustrated about the lack of government being responsive to their health concerns and not, and there is some truth to that. And so one of our goals is to make that, realize that better through specific actions that will favor regulatory activities that improve health. And I just wanted to end with, I got to go to a meeting, the ISEE meeting, International Society of Environmental Epidemiology, and I had an opportunity to go to the legacy sites, and I really highly recommend this if anyone is near Montgomery, Alabama, because they're not that old, but they document the kidnapping and enslavement of people from Africa that really was integral to the founding and really success of the United States. And it was a long, and still continues to be a long road to address that legacy. This is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which memorializes the thousands of Black Americans that were lynched after the Civil War. And that, many people worked for many years to address these injustices and still work on it. And sometimes they don't survive to see the success of that. And so I thought this was really important to go to reminds me of how important our own work is. So thank you for this talk. And if you want to follow us, you can on our social media, and you can sign up for our listserv for the Center to End Corporate Harm. And those are the web pages.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tracey. I regret that we are out of time. I want to acknowledge.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. But it was. Thank you so much for for all the amazing information as well as the inspirational ending, because this is our gala is for, in fact, advocacy and action. So, and I just want to acknowledge the question in the chat, and I would really urge everyone to get on to sign up to get the information from PRI, and you'll be kept well informed in incredibly clear and cogent communication. So thank you so much, Tracey, for all your work, and also for planning for the future with your work, for the work that you're doing to plan for how the EPA could be run in the future is our version of the plans that got us here from the other side. So, and we will have to take you out for drinks though to get the Nancy Beck story. So
it's a good one.
Anyway, with that, I'm just wanted to thank so much Tracey and also Norman for all the important work that you've shared with us this evening and for the inspiration. We are really grateful for you. And I'm now honored to introduce a San Francisco Bay PSR board member, Mary Williams, who's a retired pediatric dermatologist and currently an activist extraordinaire. So Mary, I'm going to hand over the mic to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracey. In addition to our internship program, another way that SF Bay PSR supports the next generation is through our annual awards to emerging health activists. When we began this program about 5 years ago, we were able to identify and recognize 3 next generation activists each year, while for the past 2 years, this increased to 4 young leaders. This year, as we respond with shock and dismay to the unprecedented attacks by the Trump administration on science and our public health system, and gutting the EPA, as we have heard, of the hard-fought-for regulations of air, water, and soil pollution, and their denial of the perils of global warming, and their sale of armaments to Israel that are used in the indiscriminate slaughter of children, health workers, journalists, and other civilians. Amid all this discouraging news, day after day, until we are numbed by emotional fatigue, it is even more remarkable that the youth in our professions are not standing by. Instead, the number and intensity of youth activists coming to our attention continues to grow, such that tonight we recognize the contribution of 6 outstanding health activists. In recognition of their accomplishments in promoting peace, addressing the health impacts of climate change, and fostering health equity and environmental justice, each will receive a certificate and a check for $250. In alphabetical order, I will now introduce our awardees in this video. Debbie Purcell Adam is a third-year medical student at UCSF. With a dual interest in public health and kidney disease, she studies the role of pollution in chronic renal disease in rural East Africa. She is now investigating environmental pollutants for the Richmond Shoreline Alliance. Her service to community health clinics in the Mission and Tenderloin and co-chair of UCSF's Black Women in Medicine further demonstrate Debbie's commitment to environmental justice and health. Congratulations, Debbie.
Hello. Thank you so much for selecting me as a recipient of the SFBA chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility Emerging Health Activist Award. I am grateful to be here and among people who are passionate about environmental health justice. As a medical student at UCSF and a scholar through the Earth Center Environmental Scholars Program, I had the opportunity to work with fellows from the Reach the Decision Maker group, as well as Richmond Shoreline Alliance, a community-led advocacy group here in Richmond, California. My work with them was collecting information regarding cancer and non-cancer effects of toxins located at the AstraZeneca Superfund qualified site, which is adjacent to the Richmond community. I think what's most meaningful about this work, outside of being a part of an effort that protects the health of Richmond residents, is that I've been able to work alongside wonderful environmental health activists and change makers like Janet Jackson and Dr. Marjane Mourney, who served as my mentor during this time.
The next award goes to Rio Barari Kane. While working on her combined MD-PhD degrees at UCSF, she developed curricula on climate change and health for dissemination throughout the entire UC system. She conceived and implemented a panel discussion for medical students featuring leaders of local environmental justice communities and members of the San Francisco Department of Public Health. She organized student tours of West Oakland to meet with community leaders and learn directly about their environmental health issues. Rio, we are pleased to honor your work on climate justice.
My name is Rio, she, her pronouns, and I'm an MD-PhD student at UCSF. I'm fortunate to work with an incredible interdisciplinary team of faculty and students to create and implement curriculum on the health effects of climate change. Our curriculum highlights the ways climate change magnifies health disparities and the actions health professionals can take to be agents for change. As one example of this curriculum, first-year medical students attended a workshop on the health effects of air pollution integrated with our pulmonology block. That same day, the medical students attended a panel discussion where community leaders from the San Francisco Department of Public Health and an environmental justice organization discussed air pollution in San Francisco and its disproportionate effects on communities living in low-income housing. It's a joy to see this curriculum in action, and it's an honor to be here tonight.
Dr. Tara Benish is an emergency physician in Oakland. A graduate of the UCSF-UC Berkeley Joint Medical Program, she completed a fellowship in climate and health policy at the University of Colorado, where she now teaches. She has worked with the CDC to develop physician education and public health preparedness for climate-related events, and led an amicus curiae on the health impacts of climate change for the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. Tara, we honor your work on behalf of climate resilience and health policy.
The most meaningful part of my work is that climate action provides us with a framework to accelerate some of the changes that we as healthcare providers want to see for our patients and communities. By considering what's best for the climate and the world around us, we're automatically compelled to think about issues of equity, sustainability, and resilience, all of which help our patients and communities. When we consider what's best for the ecosystem around us, we think about how to undo existing inequities. We think about long-term plans that ensure that we thrive in the future rather than just react to one catastrophe after another. And we think about ways that we as humans can prevent disease rather than to just treat it. I believe that climate change is not just something scary to be afraid of, but something that we can address in conjunction with our work as healthcare providers to ensure that we have a healthier world, not just for us as humans, but for us as a global community. Thank you.
Camilla de Periola Casulino is in her third year in the Joint Medical Program with a deep commitment to immigrant health and equity. She founded a national support group for undocumented students and is developing a network to protect immigrant patients across all UC medical campuses. She developed and led trainings for medical professionals across Northern California on immigrant rights and protections. These are but a few instances of her tireless advocacy and outreach. Congratulations, Camilla.
Hi, my name is Camila, and I'm honored to be one of this year's award recipients. My advocacy work includes creating Know Your Rights trainings with Dr. Jyothi Marbin to equip healthcare professionals with tools to safeguard immigrant families in clinical settings. As a student in the PRIME program, which focuses on underserved communities, I saw that students across California were working on similar immigration initiatives. To bring these efforts together, I helped expand UCSF's Medicine for Migration group, an organization supporting immigrant patients, into a statewide coalition to share resources and to strengthen our collective ability to protect immigrant communities in healthcare settings. This work is especially meaningful to me because it is rooted in community. I've been supported every step of the way by my family, mentors, and peers who inspire me to keep advocating. It has been powerful to see our efforts grow through collaboration with other passionate students, especially during such a critical time. Thank you again for this recognition.
Matteo Frumholtz is a PhD candidate in public health at the University of Minnesota with an interest in urban planning and environmental justice. A rising leader of the Peace Caucus within the American Public Health Association, he has promoted a shift in leadership towards students and early public health graduates. He uses his skills to creatively solve public health challenges by connecting science to policy and advocacy. We honor Mateos for his informed and holistic approach to building health as an essential foundation for peace.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you all today and for allowing me to share a bit of gratitude for this award. I'm an active member of the American Public Health Association's Peace Caucus, but I'm based here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. And last year, APHA held their annual conference here, and I wanted to do something really special. And with the help of the Peace Caucus, I was able to host an incredible panel of local organizers and activists that are working to advance peace and health here in Minnesota. The focus of our session was to talk about how settler colonialism manifests here in the Twin Cities. So we learned about the ongoing legacy of Native genocide and dispossession, the detrimental impacts of environmental racism in our cities, and the state-funded genocide unfolding before our eyes in Gaza. Now, my personal projects try to center environmental injustices here in the Twin Cities, where a growing coalition of people are fighting hard to eliminate some of the key drivers of air pollution in our cities. Now, working with and learning from incredible activists in the Peace Caucus inspire and motivate me to continue this ever important work. I really want to thank the organizers at PSR in San Francisco for this incredible honor and award. Thank you so, so much.
Joni Henry is a recent graduate of UC Santa Cruz, where he was a leader in climate activism on the campus and beyond, working with the Sunrise Santa Cruz Coalition. He led efforts to decarbonize university energy systems and ban fossil fuel-funded research, and spearheaded a campaign to pass the Make Polluters Pay Act, garnering support at city and county level. He created and hosted an interdisciplinary climate justice lecture series. We honor Jonah's deep commitment to solving the climate crisis through activism.
Hi, my name is Jonah Henry, and I'm a climate justice organizer in LA. The main group that I'm involved in is the Sunrise Movement. I serve as the coordinator for our chapter's schools team, which works on fostering climate activism at high school and community college campuses throughout the LA region. And I'm also a leading member of our chapter's Actions and Advocacy team, which is focused right now on the Polluters Pay Climate Superfund Act at the state level and on transit-oriented affordable housing development at the local level. What I find meaningful about this work is all the young people I meet who have such a clear vision for what a more equitable and sustainable society should look like, and working together to really gain the skills we need to translate that vision into pragmatic and effective forms of local advocacy. I really feel like every second of my time that I'm investing as a volunteer in Sunrise is building the human capacity that we need to continue the climate movement for several decades to come.
Congratulations, and let's send up some more balloons for these marvelous young activists.
We're going to get them all on the screen for a moment of applause. Give us just a second. Okay, well, there we go. All right, let's do it. Yeah, yay, a round of applause. Congratulations, everyone.
Well, dear guests, it is time to say goodnight. But first, I want to say a few thank yous. Congratulations again to our awardees. Thank you to our individual sponsors and institutional sponsors. Thank you again to our incredible interns, volunteers, and part-time staff, Giselle, Bailey, Julie, Daphne, Sabrina, Shivangi, for making tonight happen. Thank you to Norman Solomon and Tracey Woodruff for your insights and the strength of your voices. Thank you to our Gala committee, Bob Gould, Mary Williams, Jeff Ritterman, Patrice Sutton. And thank you to all of you for buying tickets and donating. Thank you everyone for making this a memorable and special community gathering, as well as a successful fundraiser. By joining us this evening, you have helped SF Bay PSR to continue to protect health, democracy, and justice. We look forward to working with you in the future. Good night. Enjoy the rest of your evening.